Welcome to the Great Canadian Piggy Bank, helping Canadian parents raise money smart kids. Today, we're talking about something almost every parent struggles with. How do you help your kids financially without creating dependency or entitlement? Whether you have a little or a lot of money, many questions come up around this. We're kicking off a two-part series with someone you probably already know from your feed, Eli, the money guy, also known as Elijah Kirchmeyer. Welcome to the show, Eli. Assume the listener knows nothing about trusts or inheritance. I'm sure lots of people do, but just let's go right back to the very basics. So you're talking about inheritance or trusts or gifting. What are the basic terms that every Canadian parent should understand about this?
Sure. So basics of an inheritance, you pass away, either you have a will or you do technically have a will. It's just written by the government of the province that you are in. So for example, where I am in Alberta, there's the Alberta Wills and Succession Act. So that determines what actually happens to your assets. So who inherits them. So the whole point of writing a will is that you get to determine how it's divided up, as opposed to leaving it, kind of up to the government. So
Hmm.
everybody should understand, yeah, if you don't have a will, what is actually going to happen to your assets? They should also have a will, and we typically recommend having a professional lawyer draft that. There are a few organizations out like willful.ca, which kind of exploded over COVID when they allowed for the electronic signatures of wills. I know they've become really popular. Typically, if there's any kind of complexities, blended families, that kind of stuff, we would always recommend that be done by a professional, especially if there's corporations, or you want to start talking about some of these trust type of structures. In terms of a trust, I would learn a little bit if you can about,
Hmm.
even just speaking to somebody about how a trust may or may not be of an advantage to you. The other thing is, if you are in a province, for example, like BC or Ontario, where probate costs are higher, they're a
Mm-hmm.
percentage of the value of an estate. Alberta, it's cheap, $500. Manitoba, there is no probate cost anymore. But where it's a percentage of assets, you can have things like alter ego or joint partner trust, where effectively your assets are in a trust. So that way you get to avoid that 1.5% probate fee, which can save a lot of money, right? So that's
Hmm.
again some basic trust understanding, and then going back to your point of kind of how our trusts use. That's another example of
Interesting. I didn't know that. There's so much I need to learn.
that. You can't open
So,
those until you're usually 65 anyways, because otherwise you're
yeah.
going to trigger a deemed disposition ahead of it going in there. But if you're over the age of 65, yeah, you can put assets in it, avoid those probate costs. Yeah, there's some costs of setting up
Hmm.
the trust and the annual filing on it. But generally speaking, it's fairly insignificant compared to
Hmm.
potentially 1.5% of the value of all of the assets that you own.
That's interesting. So then I've set up a trust for my daughter, and it's her allowance. So I make her save a quarter of her allowance every month and put it towards investment. I've been making her do that since five. So five little ones. So I
Yeah.
set up an informal trust with her. What do you recommend if parents went down that way? What would you recommend them do? Set up a formal trust or an informal? And it was more because I just didn't want to get lawyers involved because it felt ridiculous.
I mean, an informal trust really isn't a very, again, it's not a true trust. So the disadvantage of that is it's hard from a tax perspective. Like, again,
Hmm.
depending on how you structure it, usually what ends up happening is the tax is still taxed in the tax is still paid in the hands of the parent managing
It
it.
is.
Whereas
Yeah.
a formal trust, it would be in their hands. Again, from a pure, let's just start building some habits. Let's get our kids going.
Mm,
Let's get them teaching about this. Who cares about the intricacies of saving a little bit in tax? It's like, that's a simple, cheap
yeah.
way to just kind of get going. Obviously, if the numbers get larger and there's value to it, like an annual trust return might cost $1,000 to set up.
Mm,
Like they're not expensive to set up, right? Maybe
mm.
one, I mean, depends on the type, but somewhere between 1 and 10 grand, depending on kind of the complexities of things. Sometimes a little bit higher, but like you got to kind of weigh the pros and cons of, okay, is it worth
Mm,
it to get a formalized structure in place, or am I just
exactly.
trying to teach my kid good habits to begin with?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And I was definitely and for listeners out there, my child's not a trust fund baby. There's $1,000 in it. And she's been saving since 5 years old to 13. It's it's literally was just to teach her how to start investing. Um,
And that's the problem in Canada, is that there's not a lot of great accounts or ways to get your kids kind of involved to be able to practice doing that type of stuff. So that informal trust is perfect, or even just within an RESP.
Mm.
If you're a parent and you haven't maxed out your TFSA, you could open up a second TFSA that they could be utilizing. So that way, at least the growth is tax sheltered. Yeah, it's using
Hmm.
your room, but if the room isn't being maxed out anyways, then
Fully
that's a decent
utilized.
option.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's an interesting thing. Okay, so then what are a few simple ways parents can help support kids financially without replacing work ethic? I'm thinking like when they're 18 or 20 when they've left the house.
Yeah, that's
Hopefully. Hopefully left the house.
that's always a heated question. And I mean, culturally, obviously, it very much changes kind of culture to culture. Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing more and more parents assisting their kids with down payments on
Mhm.
houses. Parents who want their kids to live in the same city as them because they
Mhm.
don't want them to go away. They want to remain close to them, but they just realize it's expensive now to buy
Mhm.
a house, especially like a detached home or even condos in a lot of markets, right? So we're starting to see that more, helping pay for weddings and things like that as well, just because the cost of that has just ballooned like crazy over the last say,
Mhm.
decade or two. So I think there's that give and take of, hey, what can we actually afford? I always tell parents the best example you could set for your kids is to take care of your own finances first, rather than always focusing on them, and then you're just a burden on them later in life. Now there's
Mhm.
obviously differences between cultures, and as an advisor we never push people in any one direction. It's just to kind of point them different ways. But I think that's kind of a universally accepted way of thinking, that okay, we got to take care of ourselves, and that's the kind of the best way we can kind of set an example for our kids. So if you're leading that lifestyle and saying, okay, we're putting it away into savings, and your kids can see what you're doing and having those open lines of communication, I think you're setting your kids up for success to say, okay, this is how we're able to help you because of what we're doing, as opposed to just blanket giving the money so that they don't have
Mm.
to feel the stress of kind of earning it on their own.
Mhm. Yeah, I've definitely been thinking a lot about that, about how to help her with her first home because being in Vancouver, it's unbelievable. So, not that I think she needs to stay in Vancouver, but I just think anywhere is going to be really hard for her. So, I'm trying to figure out how do I balance my retirement savings with helping her financially with her first home. So
Yeah, and,
then,
and obviously once they're
yeah.
18, we'll see parents that, okay, if there is RESP money that's left over, we're pulling out of that. We're
Mm,
dumping that right into a first home savings account, right? You've
smart.
got your $8,000 a year there. Also putting money into their TFSA, you've got
Mm,
$11,000 of room in there. Obviously, it's going to depend on the family circumstances and whether
mm,
they have the extra cash flow to do that type of stuff.
mm,
But there are a few of these new vehicles that exist out there that can definitely help. They're reducing taxes, and you're able to get more efficient growth on your money.
mm.
Realistically, most kids nowadays that are at 18, they're not really thinking about buying a house.
Nope.
They want the flexibility. They want to be able to travel. They want to be able to do things. So if you're pushing your kid to buy a house right off the bat, or
Yeah.
you feel this pressure to do that, that's just not the reality for most kids. They're not going to be ready to settle down for longer anyways.
So then how do parents balance, I want to give them a leg up and I want them to stand on their own feet? Like we can help our daughter, but I also don't want to take over like that first pride of getting my first condo is just I don't want to take that moment away from her and it's always something I thought of.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's, I mean, the background. Maybe I don't know how you saved up and did that, but I remember when I bought my first house, it's like, yeah, I didn't. My parents didn't have any money. They didn't have the ability to
Mhm.
help with a down payment and that kind of stuff.
Same.
So there is a huge value to that, like
Yeah.
self confidence, right? That you build in
Yep.
kids when they can do that. One thing we have seen with people is saying, okay, rather than just gifting a certain amount of money, it's okay, you save half, we'll save half. Right, it will match
Mm,
your savings contribution. Again, this is based on whether the parent has the ability to do this or not. So again, you're building that habit, but it's speeding them up and making it more, I guess, achievable for them.
mhm.
Because if their income is even a moderate income in a major city like Toronto or Vancouver, where you can't really get stuff for almost $1 million, depending on
Yeah.
the area and stuff that you're in. Yeah, like they're going to need some kind of assistance with that. I
Mhm.
think there is value too in making them live in somewhere that's not their dream house, obviously, right off the
Agreed.
kind of the get go, so that they can kind of learn to establish themselves on their own. So yeah,
Yeah,
I've seen clients do it a lot of different ways. I don't think there's any kind of perfect one size fits all. You're going to know your kid better than anyone else, and talking to different people and getting different ideas about how to do it, I think, is a great place to start.
agreed. Okay, so then what's the right age or stage for parents to start planning their inheritance? Like when the kids are young, when they're teenagers, when the parents retire? What's a good time for parents to start thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone's ever too young to start planning around it, right? You don't necessarily have to have all the answers in the world, but everybody should have a will. Because
Mhm.
if you don't, like I said earlier, you do. Technically, it's just written by the government of the province that you're in to determine what's going to happen to all of your assets. So, I mean, the first step is just having, kind of a will done.
Mhm.
There's obviously going to be different phases of life where things ebb and flow and change, and you're going to make tweaks and changes to stuff, and you're going to have varying levels of relationship with different kids, and you're going to have to determine what's fair, what's equal, and equal isn't always fair, and fair isn't always equal.
Mhm.
Especially when you get into situations with family businesses or family cottages, or you've helped one with a more expensive education than another. There's going to be always kind of these ebbing and flowing in pieces, but you're never too early to start. Yeah, kind of just putting something down and just kind of moving on it, because otherwise we'll run into a lot of cases where you get that procrastination because there's too many things to kind of think about, and
Mhm.
people get that analysis paralysis and then just don't do anything at all.
Mhm.
Just the biggest part of the will when you have kids is guardianship,
Yeah.
right? Because there's certain scenarios, especially we'll deal with small town people and stuff
Yeah.
like that, where somebody passes away, and that child does get brought to a family member as opposed to ending up in foster care. But technically, the government has to basically approve anybody who's going to take guardianship of that child, even if it's temporary, because they don't know. Just because they're your relative doesn't mean it's a good, safe place for them to go. So if you
Yeah.
haven't named a guardian for those children, there's a very real chance that those kids are going to go into foster care for a period of time
Mhm.
until they can determine who should actually be looking after those kids.
My parents didn't update their will till they're in their 80s, and it was so beautiful because we were still all four of us were still going to my uncle, so we would always remind our uncle that we were all going to come live with them when when our parents ever died. They changed it. He felt much better about that.
Good.
Um, okay, what's something that parents often misunderstand about TFSAs, RESPs, or gifting while alive versus in a will?
Something they misunderstand about gifting while alive. I mean, yeah. I would say one of the biggest misunderstandings with TFSAs comes around the contribution room.
Mhm.
Most people know if you've been maxing out, your TFSA annually, or it's grown, you get your basic amount, kind of per year. So as of right now, it's your plus all of the growth is your technical room. So if your TFSA now has $150,000 sitting, let's just say, and you pull out 150 grand, you still have that $150,000 worth of room. So if you
Mhm.
are going to be pulling money out to gift to somebody else, you do technically get that room back. That room isn't like gone and now you only have the 102,000. You have
Mhm.
that plus the growth. The opposite is also true. Excuse me. If you have losses in your TFSA and then you pull that money out, that loss is actually locked in. So if you put in, let's just say 100 grand, and it lost 50% of its value because of the fact that you made bad investments, and then you pull that 50 grand, now your total contribution room is only $50,000. They don't give you that room back because of the losses.
Hmm. Okay, so then what would you recommend then? Gifting while alive or waiting till in a will?
I think for most people, and what we're seeing as a trend, is people starting to give away more money earlier.
Mhm.
Obviously, we work with a certain type of demographic that typically is better off,
Mhm.
and has more of that. But for most people, they're like, well, our kids aren't really going to need our help when they're 60 and we're, in our 80s and 90s. They need
Mhm.
help throughout their 20s and 30s. And
Absolutely.
so, why don't we, within the context of our own kind of financial plan and looking at things long term, if I have the ability to help my kids now when they actually need it the most, and two,
Mhm.
I get to see them enjoy it and experience it
Mhm.
and all those types of things, starting to gift more and do that stuff now. That's why it's really good to run those long term projections, see where your own kind of retirement and all that kind of stuff is at. But then if you are going to be gifting, starting to do it more. That's at least what we're seeing in our
Mhm.
practice. And also a lot of people do the whole generational skip, right? Where okay, we are older now, our kids are fine, but let's help the grandkids out more, right? Let's
Mhm.
start contributing to their RESPs. Let's
Mhm.
help them with down payments or paying for weddings. And I'm not saying you're giving them 100 grand, but it's kids going to put a down payment on a house, an extra 5 grand here, 5 grand there. It makes a massive difference, kind of at that stage of life, right?
So then, what is your take? And I've kind of asked this a little bit before, but I'm going to ask more directly. What's your take on parents helping their adult kids with big life financial milestones, like starting their retirement fund or contributing to a first home down payment? Like, what's a smart way to do it without creating dependency?
Yeah. And it's always a difficult question to answer because we've
Yeah.
seen so many different ways of trying to structure that.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that the best thing to do is to have those really open lines of communication and understand your kid, right? And not giving to the point that they don't have to work hard, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think there's so much value in ensuring that your kids still have to work on their
Mm-hmm.
own, and kind of feel that kind of stress
Mm-hmm.
a little bit. Warren Buffett has a famous quote. He says, I want to give my kids enough that they can do anything, but not so much that they can do nothing. And I think that
Such a great
balance
quote.
is so different between every
Mm-hmm.
family in terms of lifestyle and kind of what they grew up with. And so it's really going to be kind of situation dependent. But as soon as you take away somebody's motivation
Mm-hmm.
and kind of that, overcoming adversity, just something happens and
Mm-hmm.
people lose that motivation, and you're kind of stealing something from your kids by helping them too much. You think that you're helping them because you're giving them that leg up, or they get to experience that without having to work for it, and you want to see them happy, and that's ultimately why you're doing it, because you want to see your
Mm-hmm.
kids be successful and be happy. But you got to let them struggle a little bit. They can build that self-confidence.
I totally agree. Last question then. So if a parent wants to pass wealth to their kids and avoid entitlement, what is the single best habit that they can start today?
uh, I would say delayed gratification,
Mm,
right? In learning how to, hey, you get paid this money, it's like it doesn't even exist. It's just
mhm,
going away, right? When you can build that habit, no matter what the age in people, so that no matter what amount of money that they're going to be receiving, it's just so ingrained in their DNA not to
mhm,
just think that they can just spend all of it. Right? And I think that's really universally true across all of our clients that are saying like their 60s or 70s or 80s, who are very well off, is they're just so diligent. And a lot of them, it's a whole other issue in terms of learning how to spend all their money because they're going to
mm,
pass away with lots of it. That's a whole other conversation. But just around building that habit that they started when they were young and that they've just kept with them their whole lives, that okay, I get a dollar, I put 20% away. I get a dollar, I
mhm,
put 20% away. And it doesn't matter how much the amounts are, that's that building that habit,
mhm. I
and
agree.
not and
Yeah.
not spending that money immediately.
Yeah, I completely agree. But now the kids are looking for financial well-being and also mental well-being. And so being able to save some of that money too, or being able to use some of that money. So it's balancing
And
that.
that's a whole other conversation around values, right? And as
Hmm.
as you accumulate more, then it becomes more around, okay, doing more values based budgeting. If you're okay, what's actually important to me? Is
Yeah,
it important to me to to have a wonderful coffee every morning? And like I need a really good coffee that brings a lot of joy and happiness to my life, and I'm okay
absolutely.
spending that. I don't care at all about fancy cars. But that's just not
Agreed.
something I value spending on at all, right? So that's another thing that chatting with your kids about, okay, what is important? Because for some people, it really is a
Hmm.
car, and then they don't care about these other things, right? So, and
Mm,
that's very much on an individual basis.
yeah, I agree. Okay, this has been great, Eli. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
If there's one takeaway from this episode, it's that estate planning isn't something you do because you're wealthy or older. It's something you do because you're a parent. Having the basics in place gives you control, clarity, and peace of mind. In part two, we're going to take everything we talked about today and apply it to real life's family situations, blended families, unequal inheritance, and what happens when fair doesn't mean equal. If you found this helpful, please share it with another parent who you think might need it. I'm Christy Ray, and this is the Great Canadian Piggy Bank, helping Canadian parents raise money smart kids.